Welcome to the Conscious Diabetic Podcast.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. You're listening to the Conscious Diabetic Podcast. And today I have possibly one of the most craziest type 1 athletes, endurance people that I've had on the show. My first guest from over the side of the pond in the USA. And he's my oldest guest, which isn't a bad thing, but at 60 years old, he's had type 1 diabetes for a long time. I welcome Don Muchow. Is that right?
Yeah. Nice to be here. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So Don resides in the USA, and as I said, he's an endurance athlete. So please, we will start off with your history of diabetes, because that's the whole purpose of this podcast. And there goes my high blood sugar thing. So my alarm.
You can treat that if you need to.
No,
I'm waiting.
It's okay. I have everything under control, but it's not gonna stop until it goes back into range. So please tell us your type 1 story. And how long you've been type 1 diabetic for as well.
Yes, Brett, thank you. As we were talking in the green room here just before the podcast began, you and I have a little bit of commonality in our story. My journey as a type 1 diabetic into physical fitness began after 32 years of basically ignoring and denying the disease. In 2004, I received news from my my retina specialist, that I had proliferative retinopathy. And probably like you, the treatment at the time was laser coagulation of the leaking blood vessels in the eye.
Correct.
And I was left with a blind spot in my left eye after the treatment. And I spoke to my retina specialist and said, well, what's the prognosis look like, And he said, well, if you come back in here for more of these, you're going to get more blind. But you'll be less blind than if I didn't treat them. And so this is the trade-off. And I said, well, I don't ever want to come back in here for another one of those. For anybody who isn't diabetic or who's never had a high energy laser fired into their eyeball, it's the most pain anyone can inflict on you without touching you. Possibly short of, getting news of a divorce or something. That was a wake-up call for me. I had already signed up for a 5K Thanksgiving turkey trot here in the US in Dallas. And I had already made myself a promise that after growing out of control and being 50 pounds overweight, that I was going to be a good boy. So I had made the commitment to a physically active lifestyle and was kind of stumbling forward with it. And then I received the news that I had the proliferative retinopathy and had to have the treatment. So it was kind of a kick below the belt, and that got me started with a mindset of, I don't have a choice to go back where I was before. I know what the future is going to be like if I keep going in this direction. I was justifiably afraid of low blood sugars induced by exercise. In fact, when I was diagnosed in 1972, I think it was May of 1972, my doctor at the time said, you need to live a very rigid and predictable lifestyle and avoid things that will make your blood sugar go up or down in a significant way. Generally eating too many carbs, too much refined sugar and starches will make it go up, but vigorous exercise will make it drop. So he actually advised me not to exercise. Because in 1972, if you wanted to see what your blood sugar was, you went to the emergency room and had them run a test. The home glucose meters weren't available in the mass market until about 1980 when I got my first one. So I had a good 8 years of wild guesses about what my blood sugar was, trying as a 11-year-old kid to have a predictable, predictable lifestyle in terms of physical activity. And I just kind of gave up and didn't exercise. And whenever I did, I always regretted it because I would have these shaky, sweaty, low blood sugar episodes. So in 2004, when I began that journey anew, it was with the same fears that I had had before about low blood sugars.
Mm-hmm.
But this time I had the sort of the bear breathing down my back, basically saying, well, you need to keep running forward, because if you turn around, I'm going to eat you. That bear being the complications of diabetes that I had already begun to experience. And I took the attitude of, all right, well, if there ever was such a thing as a do-over, this is my do-over, but I need to take it and not look back. And that kind of began my journey into figuring out ways that I could face the risks that practically every type 1 has, and figure out a better way other than hiding from it. So that's my journey in short, and it kind of ended on the Atlantic coast. I got to think of something else to do because I ran out of land.
Yeah.
But but that's the journey in short.
Yeah. So as you said, we were talking before. The parallels are for the listeners is, yeah, I also suffered from retinopathy, but quite extreme in that I lost my right eye. I lost most of my left eye as well, and I have 20% left in my left eye. Proliferative retinopathy, 5 vitrectomies in each eye, air gas, silicon in both eyes. Every single thing that could go wrong went wrong, from hemorrhaging, blood clots in both eyes as well. And I'll tell you, there is one worse pain than laser, and that's having direct ocular nerve pain straight to the brain.
Oh my gosh.
I think I had a hemorrhage, and it pressed on the ocular nerve for about 4 or 5 hours, and it just made me vomit and vomit and vomit, which made it worse. And then I was in emergency surgery. That was possibly the worst thing I've ever experienced.
Okay, you win.
So, what was it like in the 70s as a child with diabetes? Because for me, it was I was isolated. I was the only diabetic that I knew.
My experience was very similar. I did not know anyone. I always talk about when it comes to the type 1 community and learning ways to do things, I always talk about cheating off of someone else's paper. I guess metaphorically speaking, in the 70s, the kids weren't sitting close enough to each other to cheat off of their papers. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know any type 1s. My parents did the best they could, but their access to information to enable them to be helpful in in my control was also limited. And as a kid, you get the little announcement upon your diagnosis that you're going to need to have shots for the rest of your life. It doesn't really sink in. They give you an orange to practice on, and it looks like a fun game for a while until you realize that, okay, you're the next guinea pig here and you need to get good at this. Yeah. And I remember having to test the amount of sugar I had passed in my urine using the, I believe it was Benedict solution. I think it was a Clinitest was the name of the whole setup, but it involved, for people who don't go back this far, what it involved was taking a sample of your urine and putting a tablet into a test tube of it. And the tablet contained both lye and a reagent solution that turned a kind of poop brown color when your blood sugar was high and a dark blue color when it was low. Or I should say urine sugar, not blood sugar. This was an indication of what your sugar had been some time ago, but beyond that wasn't useful for day-to-day management. It really just kind of told you what your mistakes were, and at the end of the day, you kind of had to go, okay, well, today was a good day or today was a bad day. Maybe tomorrow will be better.
Yeah.
We didn't have the amount of regular counseling and guidance that you probably would get these days with modern endocrinologists and online resources and so forth. So the feedback loop was very delayed, and it took a long time before I could see there was any progress in my self-care. And mostly what that amounted to was if I could feel like I was low, and then in the early 1980s, I could test that I was low, I could treat it. But it wasn't until sometime after 2004, when I first started being active, that I came in contact with anybody who said, well, one of the tricks and one of the ways that, you can lose some of the weight you've gained by over-treating low blood sugars and taking on more calories than you had planned to in the day is that exercise is sort of an equivalent of insulin in many ways.
Yes.
Increases insulin sensitivity. So you for a certain amount of exercises, for each person it's different, but you can take less insulin and store less energy, use more energy, and sort of up your metabolism a little bit so that you begin to burn off some of the weight that contributes to circulatory problems. You can begin to have more in-range blood sugars, which kind of helps with some of the stress side effects and the long-term complications from poor control. But until somebody told me that, it was like I had been given a knife and no fork and told to eat dinner, and dinner was soup.
Yeah, that's good.
So I didn't have enough of the tools handy. And once I was able to reach out to people in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, I guess, and come in contact with other type 1s who had some familiarity with exercise, I did have the paper I could cheat off of. And I cheated off of it as long as I could. And somewhere along the line got the idea that, let's just see what I can find out. Every time I've learned something, whether it was the hard way or from a diabetic friend, I've been better off for knowing it. And so I, somewhere along the line, made a conscious choice to kind of push the envelope and be part of that discovery process so other kids could cheat off of my paper.
Yeah.
And I don't always get the answers right, but I learn something every time I try.
Yeah. And I think that it's a part of what I've written about in my book, yet to be finished, soon to be finished.
I eagerly anticipate that, by the way.
Knowledge is a part of the journey, in that you simply cannot be diagnosed. You cannot just then take that little bit of information and say, this is going to then rule my life going forward. The knowledge has to be updated constantly, especially with things like technology, fitness, exercise, foods, as some of the key things that I feel which changed my life as well. And then the application of that knowledge as intelligence. And as you say, you implement it into your lifestyle in small chunks, see what the benefits are, see if you can get those perceived benefits, and then you go, okay, yeah, that works. And I'm going to utilize that in order to make my life even better. Because something I've talked about in the past is, it's not just your life, is it? It's actually, as I used that isolatory feeling I used to have, I used to carry around with me, and think it was just me. But actually, it was affecting my wife, it was affecting my family, it was affecting my friends, it was affecting my relationships, it actually affected my work as well. So the more you take on board, the better. I found the better life is in general as a diabetic.
I would agree with that, especially the part about how it has an effect on other people's lives. One of the things that I know many of your listeners and viewers may resonate with is the idea that one of the challenges with type 1 is that, especially if you have a severe low blood sugar, you are incredibly dependent on the knowledge and goodwill of others to help you make it back. And it's important when you look at your relationship with those other people that you see both the similarities of interests. You know, you're both interested, for instance, with a spouse, you're both interested in maintaining your health in the years going forward, but also to understand that you have different roles. You know, your role is to acknowledge what you have, climb out of that hole of judging yourself by your blood sugars, and see those numbers as data, and see them as a body of experience from which you can draw further lessons for how to do things differently. And to acknowledge that no matter what you may try, some days it's just not going to go well. Because the moment you stop judging yourself by that yardstick, it makes it possible that you will stop imagining that others are judging you that way. And I know early on in my journey with the disease, I married Leslie in 1983, and early on, if she would ask me, you know, what's your blood sugar? And it was just a question from somebody who was highly invested in my health, wanting to know that things were okay. But early on, the way I heard that was, you didn't test frequently enough. And it's very easy to take every question as some kind of judgment that you're a bad diabetic.
Yeah.
I put some of that in the lap of endocrinologists who judge people by their numbers, you know, who will basically sit and have a tense conversation with you about a bad A1C. As though that's the only thing that matters.
Yes.
You know, they don't ask you what's going on in your life. You know, I wouldn't expect the same A1C numbers the week after Thanksgiving or as I would during the active months of summer. But, you know, 15 minutes with an endocrinologist, you don't get that kind of deep insight.
Correct.
You don't have somebody going, well, what happened Tuesday? Heck, I don't know. What is this, a deposition? So that doesn't help, but a lot of it rests with the individual and inclinations towards self-judgment that are reinforced by the realities of living with the disease. And it's very hard to break out of that mold and to stop judging yourself, especially when you think you're getting into some degree of control and you have a bad day. What I like to liken it to is my very first half Ironman. I blew a tire, I think it was on mile 6 of the bike ride, and I missed the cutoff because it took me longer than I thought to, I had gator skins on my bike, and they're incredibly tight clincher tires, and they're almost impossible to get off, even with one of those little bike irons. And I kept thinking to myself, well, what did I do wrong? It was my fault I blew a tire. No, that's crazy. I didn't go slash my own tires. You know, I ran over something, it punctured the rim. It was not, I'm sorry, punctured the tire. It was not my fault. And yet I had to deal with consequences. Diabetes is a lot like that. Sometimes you run over something in the road and it's not your fault, but you still have to deal with it. And the sooner you accept that reality, the easier it is to deal with.
Yeah. I link it to myself, and that you can't judge yourself, but what you can do is say, I look back upon my day every day, really, of what did I do? It's almost that reflection process, the same as meditation. You ask those questions, you sit there and you think, okay, what happened here? What happened there? And some things, anxiety is obviously typically caused by not the inability to control external factors, or trying to control external factors, which you can't control. And sometimes that happens with diabetes. There are just some things you cannot control. What you can do is take stock of what you do have the ability to control, which is your input, seeing your perspective on things as well, and your output. So what food goes in, what exercise do I do? And I'm simplifying in quite a certain way, but yeah, take care of the food that goes in, and do some, and I always try and say, if you're doing nothing or you're not moving, move more than you have been doing every day. Just do something. Like, you might have someone who's, and I'm not saying, I've sat on the couch, my couch. I've been really unhealthy. I was at one point, it's 92 kilograms. So that is 190,
Yeah,
200,
200 pounds.
200 pounds. So I didn't realize it then until I saw a photograph, and I was like, wow, that is big. And then that gave me the impetus to that's where I did my 100-day challenge. And that is what my book is about. I gave myself a goal, 100 days. I broke it down into smaller goals to do with food, fitness, education. And then I just went and got it. At the end of it, I reduced my body fat by over 50%. I lost 15 kilograms, I think 14, 15 kilograms. So 40, 50
Okay, yeah,
pounds.
that's pretty serious weight loss.
And I did that just through sheer, and I did not like every day of it either. It was, you have to you wake up the one day, you commit to what you're doing that day. Even if you do 50% of what you set out to do, just do something. You mentioned Ironman as well, which
Yes.
which is one of the reasons we're talking, in that you've done some absolutely insane physical achievements, shall we say. Can you give me a small list of some of the
Sure.
things? Because I'm sure we'd be here for another hour just going through what you've actually done.
And I have a tendency to make it run long, but the sort of the speed reader version of it is, after that first 5K, and I think it was 2000, and it's either late 2004 or it was 2005. I think it was 2004 though, because I had already signed up for it at the time of the retinopathy diagnosis. After that, I made a decision that I would keep running, and I would stop when it got honestly too hard and I couldn't get past it. And what I found was that as I increased the distances and became more confident, the horizon kept moving out. I ran my first half marathon in 2009, my first marathon in 2011, and around 2013, I just on a lark, I felt like my times were improving on marathons. I went out and ran a 50K. It was, I think it was the Cowtown Ultra, which is a race in Fort Worth. It all distances, all the way up to a marathon and a 50K. And there was something about that experience where everyone peeled off to finish the marathon. There were something like 20,000 people signed up for the race. And most of those peeled off to the finish line for the marathon. And that year, I think there were 300 people signed up for the 50K, which is, for many 50Ks, that's fairly anemic. But I felt like I was somebody special. And running the last 5 miles past the marathon turnoff, and getting the crazy people cheering you on, and the flat Coke and the chocolate covered pretzels at the turnaround to head back to the finish line. It was just enough of that sort of junkie juice to get me hooked on thinking about longer distances. And let's see now. I'll speed it forward a bit. In 2016, 2017 was a big year for me. I had from 2014, 15, and 16 had run as a member of a relay team on this 223-mile course. Off the top of my head, I'm not entirely certain how many kilometers that is, but probably 350, something
350,
like that.
yeah, about 350.
That's the nice thing about athletics, is that you do get acquainted with kilometers and it does stick.
Yeah.
But I got a bee in my bonnet to run that relay course by myself as a solo runner. And in 2017, I was training both for a full Ironman and to run that 223-mile course as a solo runner. That was one of the few relay runs in the US that allowed solo entrance. So I was pretty excited about doing it. And of course, I did everything wrong, all the way from diabetes management to blister management. But that year I did my first full Ironman, my first 100-mile run, and my first 200+ mile run. And it was in 2017 that I began to get this idea that if I can run 223 miles and live to talk about it, I might be able to do longer distances. So in 2018, I signed up for Relay Iowa as their first solo runner. That was a 339-mile run from Sioux Falls to Dubuque, from the Missouri to Mississippi rivers. And I was a little bit better at that than I had been at the 223 mile run. I ran into some issues with not getting enough sleep and not managing stress during the 100-miler and the 200-miler. But by the time I did Iowa, I sort of recognized the snake in the car. I like to use that analogy, that doing difficult athletic achievements, or even just any kind of athletic activity with diabetes, with type 1, is like driving with a snake in the car. You can't ignore the snake. You can't fight the snake while you're driving, and you can't really get out of the car unless you stop it. And so you have to learn to respect the snake and to realize that the snake is doing whatever makes sense to the snake, and you need to do what makes sense to you. So after Iowa in 2018, I planned out a route across the state of Texas, mostly to raise awareness that people living with type 1 could make choices, safe choices, to engage in programs of physical activity, and to show to the people who were not living with type 1 that we weren't a bunch of couch potatoes slamming down ho-hos and watching television all the time. And I'm trying to think of what would be similar to a ho-ho over in the UK or in Spain, but
just any biscuits,
any
or
kind of super sugary junk food.
Yeah. And
I found out by accident a few days after I got to the finish line in Texarkana that I'd actually set the record of the fastest known run across Texas. And that was a bit of a surprise to me, but when I did the research, I found out that a gentleman by the name of Jason Arsamont had taken 29 days, I want to say back in 2010, or I might be wrong about the year there, but it took me 27 days, 8 hours and 36 minutes. So I beat the record by a couple of days. And it was a pretty credible fastest known time. It actually is in the record books now, but when I realized that I had run across Texas and that was roughly between a quarter and a third of the distance across the US, I got this idea in my mind that maybe I could do the whole thing. COVID got in the way of doing it as a continuous run. I ended up having to do it in 3 chunks. But just because a friend I was talking to had slightly misunderstood my description of my goal to run across the US. I had actually picked a route from near the Los Angeles area to the Florida coast because it was a little over 2,700 miles. And if I ran to, New York, New Jersey area, it was probably going to be more like 3,000, and I didn't want the extra 300 miles. So I told him I was running from California to Florida, and he said, "Oh, you're running from Disneyland to Disney World." And at the time, I had not planned to do that, but I thought, man, that is brilliant. Put this guy in charge of marketing. He was like a 7-year-old kid, by the way.
Okay.
A big Disney fan. He just, that everything to him is Disney. So if I said California and Florida, instantly he thinks Disneyland, Disney World. Well, I did a little research, and I found out that no one had ever actually run from Disneyland to Disney World. There was an ultra runner who ran from Washington State to Disney World, I think, which is actually farther, but they don't have a Disney park in Washington State.
No.
So I had that in the back of my mind when I was running across the US. And a little bit of a side story, when I got to Disney World, my biggest concern was, this has been my concern on the entire US run, that I did not want to do any of it on private property. Not that I really thought that I was going to set any records, but given that I had thought I might run from Disneyland to Disney World, and I saw that no one had ever done that, I'd actually put in an application at Guinness and said, "Would you recognize a record like this?" Well, they didn't. Their response was that they did not consider, excuse me, they did not consider Disneyland and Disney World to be significant endpoints.
Right.
They wanted it to be from basically either the Los Angeles or San Francisco area to New York, pretty much the way Pete Kostelnik did it. And I'm not that good. Marshall Ulrich took something like, I want to say 56 days, and I was looking at taking more like 88. So it wasn't going to happen. So, but I lived with this idea in my mind that Guinness might acknowledge the record from Disneyland to Disney World until they said that wasn't going to happen either. But I had already planned out the route to be a very Guinness-minded route. So I kept it off of illegal roads. I kept it off of private roads. Basically, they have a set of rules for what roads you can take that are mostly designed around keeping people from running across their uncle's ranch in Wyoming and taking a shortcut when nobody else gets to do that. So one of the concerns I had when I got to Disney World was that we were going to be on private property for a little while, and that might invalidate somehow an attempted fastest known time from those two endpoints, which was still something I had a chance at doing. And when we got to the Contemporary Hotel across from the Magic Kingdom, which is the only Disney park at Disney World that you can reach legally and safely on foot. When we got to the Magic Kingdom, there was a security guard standing there, and he said, "Oh, are you the runner?" And I said, "Yes." And I thought, oh, here's where I get the lecture about not being on private property. And I had a cameraman with me who had started following me in Claremont, a guy by the name of Adam Strand, who actually was a 3-time Emmy Award-winning videographer. So I was flattered that he wanted to follow the run. So, but anyway, I'm running into the Disney park with a professional cameraman, which is definitely not something you're allowed to do. And so when the security guard asked me if I was the runner, I just thought, I'm going to get kicked off the property. This is going to be over pretty quickly. But instead, he said, "You have some friends waiting for you." Well, my brother had come down to meet me. He had driven all the way down from Arkansas to meet me in Cross City, Florida, and run a little bit with me, which he did. And that was one of the most important parts of my life to this day. But when the security guard said that somebody was waiting for me at Disney, I thought, okay, well, Walt and his wife Lila have managed to stay an extra couple of days. They're going to be waiting for me somewhere near the gate, So he said, "Well, go ahead. I'll walk you across the street, and you just keep going, and your friends will catch up with you there." So I ran down the red stone walkway towards the gates of the Magic Kingdom, and there were a little over 300 Disney employees, including Melissa Valaquette, the president of Walt Disney World,
Wow.
waiting for me with a cap that said Disneyland to Disney World, and balloons and vouchers, and oh my God.
Was Mickey there?
Somewhere up in all that. You know what? You don't have to have Mickey to have the magic. But I have to thank my 7-year-old friend for giving me the idea to pick the Disney parks as endpoints. Because one of the things that it did was it garnered us a lot of media attention, and I was successful every time that we made an appearance on television, that I could raise the fact that I was running to raise awareness of type 1 and exercise and the importance of being able to do both of those. That it really helped get the word out about why I was really running. Because I got to tell you, 3,000 some odd miles or even 2,800 is a long way to run. If the only thing that is sustaining you is your idea that you're a badass. Somewhere after the 9th or 10th blister, you just don't care whether you're a badass, you just want to finish. And the idea that we had actually successfully brought the issue out in the public was very meaningful to me. And it kind of closed the circle with starting to be active in 2004. So I know that's a kind of a long version of the short story I had promised to tell you, but that's kind of the journey with type 1 and physical activity for me.
No,
I can't run any farther now, but certainly not any farther than that. But I am continuing to stay committed to physical activity and to paying forward to others living with the disease that you don't have to run and hide, you don't have to deny it. And while your fears of low blood sugars are justified, you have to live with that snake, and it's not going to leave the car, and you got to find the safest way to do it.
Yeah, that's the whole reason I'm talking with you, because of the Disneyland to Disneyland run. But obviously there was a massive history of you with all the other events. Now there's 2 questions that I've got from you from that experience. One is about your food strategy, or your calorie strategy, shall we say. So what did you do with regards to intake, food planning, carbohydrates, and how did you administer your dosage side of things? And also, actually, were you using any technology with regards to that as well?
Yes, I was. So this is the sponsor plug. I'm using a Tandem T-Slim X2 pump with Control IQ.
Yep, so am I.
Best thing since sliced bread, possibly better than sliced bread.
I completely agree.
I'm also using the Dexcom G6,
yes,
which integrates with that pump and enables Control IQ to do its business.
Yes.
I should acknowledge that I actually just recently signed an endorsement contract with Dexcom. But as the saying goes, I'm a customer too. I credit that with a lot of the success in knowing what my blood sugar is. One of the little surprises with the Dexcom system was that my wife uses an app called Dexcom Follow, which I kind of think of it as sort of a baby monitor for blood sugars. And when we were executing the run, one of the things that Leslie's responsibility was to decide what I should be eating when I stopped for a quick food and water break.
Okay.
We managed the full-on meals separately, but the quick food and water breaks were carefully calibrated to be the right stuff for me at that time. And one of the advantages of Dexcom Follow was that she would get constant notifications if I had cell reception. And we did some things to boost that, by the way. I can comment on that on the side. But she would get notified well in advance of my arrival that I was either coming in hot and low basically and needed some carbs fast, or it was time for some soup or some hummus or something else that wasn't such a sugar hit. So I never suffered from having to wait out a low or sort of shuffle through a high until my sugars came down enough that I felt like I could run. Her being able to see those numbers live actually helped a lot. So I mentioned I make a side comment about communications. We actually had what's called an over-the-road cell booster, similar to what you see on semi-trucks, mounted on our van. It sucks power like a big dog, but it will amplify the faintest of signals. And we were out in the middle of the Mojave Desert in eastern Southern California, and she was still getting notifications from Dexcom Follow. So I guess that my phone found something somewhere to talk to, and it pinged up to a satellite, or I don't know what the heck it was, but she was able to pick up the faint little cell signals that my phone was putting off, and we didn't even have to compromise in that situation. So perhaps we were fortunate, perhaps we had the right tools, I don't know. But I'd say for any other type 1 who's looking to do something similar, definitely it helps to have follow. And if your cell is cutting out, look at getting a booster.
Yeah, I have my wife has my follow, and a couple of my friends are on it, but they actually get to see how variable it can be.
So you had mentioned food and insulin, so when we get a chance, I want to get back to that. But go ahead.
So the follow-up, it almost gives them a tiny small insight into, hey, there is no just, why isn't your blood sugar just stable or normal? Well,
I got that question from some unnamed relatives who are medical professionals, and I thought to myself, this is what's wrong with the clinical care paradigm. Not my relative in particular. It's just the clinical world tends to think of it as, well, your number should be normal all the time. And I'm like, you go juggle those plates. You go stick your head in the lion's mouth. But there is a great deal of, I think I cataloged some 20 plus reasons, and somebody came up with something like 40 why your blood sugar could fluctuate. And it really is like, you don't see these guys much anymore, but back in the 70s, you see people who would put plates on the end of a stick, and they would twirl the plates, and the stick would kind of do that, but the plates would keep spinning. That's really what it's like to try and manage all those factors.
Yeah, I did sit with a specialist in Switzerland. I again spoke about it on my other podcasts. It was a doctor that he started the whole, it was sort of the movement of utilizing data, large scale data, to then develop algorithms and do other things. But he'd been a diabetologist for about 60 years, I think. So he was very well respected in the area of diabetes. And we sat down together and looked at the variables, and there was some, I can't remember the term, but all the variables, because they're also interconnected as well, it amplifies. One variable can affect another variable, which can then affect another one. And I call myself a human calculator sometimes, or a sort of a self-aware calculator about everything that's going on, and also a future predictor, because if you we have to think what's happening in 3 hours, 1 hour, 2 hours, where am I going to be, what I'm going to be doing, what effect is this? And the one thing is the Tandem and the Dexcom have taken some of that mental weightlifting away from me personally, and that I don't have to worry too much, because Control IQ is doing its thing, and Control IQ was an absolute dream, in all honesty. That update was amazing. I was on the Omnipod a number of years ago, and that was my first introduction into the pump world. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. I don't have to inject, and I don't have to do, like, obviously basal bolus insulin injections, and then moving on to the pump, which just feeds your basal all the way through. It opened up a new world for me. And then obviously the tandem came along, which then did the same thing. And yeah, for anyone that's listening that doesn't have that, do speak to your healthcare team and push for it. I pushed quite hard, and again, I know the systems are different in the USA, in terms of how you get access to things with insurance, and there's other things to discuss in terms of insulin pricing, and which I will do at another time, because over here on this side is we are heavily subsidized. I get all my tandem stuff for free. I get all my Dexcom stuff for free as a part of the national health system. My insulin is free as well, and all the other things. So well, based on where I am, I know I am very, very, very lucky with access to what I have in terms of healthcare. Now, food and insulin, sort of the strategies that you took with regards to what you did with food. Did you? For me, when I train, I'm on a sort of a calorie number of what I have to have in terms of calories to maintain or to build muscle, or to do, depends on what I'm doing with regards to my exercise. Did you calculate what you needed in terms of calories on a day-to-day
My wife, who
run?
was our crew chief, did that.
Okay.
But there were peculiar challenges to it. One of the things, as you had alluded to, was managing the calorie intake. And during some of the shorter runs, like Iowa, I know that doesn't seem very short for some people, but one of the things we learned was that if I ran steadily across a state, something in the neighborhood of 500K run, something like that, that I was burning upwards of 4,500 calories a day. If I put a push on, I was probably burning close to 5,000, maybe even a little bit over that. So one of the challenges for me with type 1 was finding ways to eat 5,000 calories a day without it looking like Cheesecake Factory. Which for folks in Europe, it's a restaurant chain here in the US known for family-sized portions served to individuals, and meals rich in carbohydrates and saturated fats.
And made famous from the Big Bang Theory as well, because they mentioned it a lot.
Yeah, pretty much. So that was a challenge, getting calories in. One of the other challenges was getting the right kind of calories in. And I had mentioned, hummus versus Oreos, that kind of challenge on the little quick food breaks. But we also had to look at our major meals during the actual running. That was principally lunch, but also the evening meal, making sure that not only did the meal replenish spent glycogen and spent calories, but that it also contained an adequate amount of protein to aid maximally in muscle recovery. And the funny thing was that when it all came down to it, the best thing for me was to eat normal food and lots of it.
Yes.
Because normal food tends to be fairly rich in fat, a certain amount of resistance starches, some simple carbs. I'm trying to think of fairly rich in protein, unless you're deliberately trying to be vegetarian or something.
Yeah, I'm vegetarian, so
yeah.
And again,
so
this
I guess one of these days I'll probably end up that way. I guess what I would say right now is that I'm fairly conscious about what I eat, and I make sure that I eat it for a purpose.
Yes.
I'm not the kind of person who would take a couple bites of a hamburger and throw it away because, that cow gave its life for those 2 bites of hamburger. Better eat the whole damn patty.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my philosophy on the run, which was get your protein where you can get it, get your carbs and your fat where you can get it, but don't be unthoughtful about what you eat, because you're going to burn pretty much all of it during the run.
Mhm.
And when I ran across, I think it was Texas, I lost 7 pounds, I think it was, or maybe it was 12. I don't remember. I think it might have been 12. And I more carefully managed it across the US and managed to keep it down to losing 7 pounds. But that was with eating 5,000 to 5,500 calories a day, which is almost 3 times the normal recommended daily calorie intake. It's just incredible the amount of energy it burns to run across something like the US. My insulin strategy, so my food strategy was eat what I need to eat. Everything needs to have protein. There were some times, although it's not my favorite thing to eat, that I drank a lot of whey shakes.
Okay.
Mixed with Nido, which is, at least here in the US, it's a very popular dry milk mix. I think that sort of made its way into the US market from Mexico. But I would mix whey powder with casein powder and Nido and cold water from our coolers. And we had something like 30 gallons of water in the van. So, and I would put in a teaspoon or 2 of olive oil, which gave it a nice sort of high fat milk texture. And I would slug those down pretty much every chance I could, because the caloric density of olive oil was just, I had to get the calories in somehow. And you can only eat so many Wendy's cheeseburgers before you start to feel sick. And so I wanted good quality calories. I wanted good quality carbs. And it was a mix of things like hummus and cheese and street tacos that Leslie would make from the camp stove, and things like Oreos and Nutter Butters and what most people would consider junk food and wasted calories. I looked at everything not with the eye of this is good food or bad food, but this is good for what I'm doing right now.
Yes, the utility of what is going in, and that's the difference. That is the differentiation. If you were just sat there doing nothing all day and you're having these, then there is no utility of it. It will just get put on you as wasted. But because you were obviously expending 5,500 calories energy a day, you're going to burn it off, don't you?
Yeah, I used to, some time ago, I posted it was a meme or something, that it had like a junior cheeseburger from McDonald's, and then a Wendy's double cheese something, single cheese everything, and then the next size up, and then the Happy Meal and all that other stuff. But I labeled them 5K, 10K, half marathon, marathon, and ultra marathon.
Yeah.
And so I kind of think of my food in that way. So I was packing down the equivalent calories, salt, fat, carbs of, one of these full-size meals that everyone tells you is bad for you. One way or the other, I was getting in the calories and the sodium and the electrolytes and the fat and everything I could. And to be quite honest, during the US run, I didn't care whether it was saturated or non-saturated fat. It was fat. I needed calories.
Yeah.
These days when I'm training, and I have a number of rest days sort of interspersed throughout the week, I'm very conscious during my rest days to eat well. I don't simply engage in the same kind of eating that I did on the run for the rest of my life. That's not a wise decision, but there are some situations where it's suitable. You mentioned insulin.
Yes.
This is off book for Tandem, so they'll disavow all knowledge of me or something like that if I officially recommend it. But I'll tell you that what I did was I ran Control IQ in sleep mode the entire day, every day that I ran the US run.
Okay.
And my reason for that, and not running it in exercise mode, was that I found that even the slightest bolus during any of my regular quick stops, for 20, 30 grams of carbs would just absolutely tank my sugar.
Yes.
And I didn't want a reduced bolus, and I didn't want it to try to let me run 160 or higher, because I wasn't taking on enough food, even at 5,000 calories a day, to run in exercise mode. I was using up pretty much everything I ate, and I was extremely insulin sensitive. So my total daily dose during rest days is normally 30 to 35 units. I was running 19 units a day during the US run, and it was all basal.
Yeah.
I think the one exception was that I would get a small bolus, and I'm talking like 2 units maybe for supper, because I was taking on a huge amount of calories and just sitting on it. But that would be my only 2 units of bolus during the day, most days.
It's your body's basically when you do exercise, any sort of exercise, post exercise as well, just for the listeners, is you become hypersensitive to insulin and also post exercise nutrients. So this is why after any weightlifting or any weight or anything that you do hard exercise, having your supplements or having protein. I have supplements because I'm a vegetarian, so I take in an additional couple of missed items like creatine and leucine, which help with muscle growth and other things. And my sports dietitian, who's very well respected in the UK, said there is a 30-minute window post-exercise. You have this, and this will maximize any benefits. But if you're going to have a bolus of insulin for any carbohydrates or anything you eat, the recommendation was to reduce it by about 50% because of this hypersensitivity to insulin.
Sure. You mentioned protein during the recovery period, and I know this isn't necessarily a strictly diabetes thing, but one of the things we got into the habit of doing, I actually get a keto cereal from an outfit called Schoolyard Snacks, which is like 1 gram of carb per probably 1 cup serving. I'm not sure how many milliliters that is.
A cup is 128 grams.
Okay.
I think this
something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, picture about what you could hold in your hands like that. Reduce it just a little bit, and we would pour some of the what I call our fortified whey shake on top of that. And I am not one of these people who lives by sort of constructing my food Lego style. So, I'm not the kind of person who is, fussy about, okay, this kind of way, and then add these items, and then give me some branched chain amino acids, and I'll make food out of it. But I kind of felt like I needed all the protein I could get. And the keto cereal was high protein. The whey shake was high protein. And I found that I needed some recovery carbs just to give my body enough energy to sort of start the rebuilding process and feed it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that much. That generally came from supper a little bit later. And in terms of glycogen replenishment, I could wait a little bit. But I needed that protein right away. And so we would usually finish each day's run with a bowl of that keto cereal, and I got to where I really loved that stuff. No matter how bad the whey tasted, the cereal was good. And I found that really just slamming down as much protein as I could and getting a good night's sleep were the two things that helped most with my recovery.
Yeah.
And I'm not a particularly carb avoiding person. I'm not one of these people who likes to run fasted or who calls myself fat adapted or anything like that. But I would say that my experience has been that the benefit of getting a good mix that includes fat and protein is that it actually is what your body wants. And if you eat nothing but carbs, like you might do for a marathon, you're going to get sick.
Yeah.
And I learned that through experience. So it's not just that I have the conviction of my preconceived notions about nutrition. I was actually, getting diarrhea from pure carb diets. And I had to do something. So I became very conscious that everything I ate was there for a reason, and to not sort of start taking things out because of my philosophy about food or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It does happen to turn out that eating healthy is actually healthy.
Yeah.
But it's also important to recognize that these things are learned from experience, not just book learning or worshiping at the altar of a particular dietary philosophy. So I think that's important for folks to recognize that the people who believe this stuff is good for you believe it because they have learned it. And you need to, if you're going to follow a philosophy for what you eat, you need to understand why it's good for you and what you're going to get out of it. You mentioned the utility of stuff.
Yes.
That I'm big on that. Do things for a reason, do things consciously and with forethought. And broadly speaking, the outcomes will be better.
And that I'm a proponent of carbohydrates 100%. And there is I talked with Paul Coker about this in the previous one. There seems to be a lack of distinction about good carbohydrates and bad carbohydrates, we will call them. Whole food carbohydrates. For me in particular, I eat approximately between 200 and 300 grams of carbohydrates a day, and that has utility.
I'm more like 100 on a rest day, probably 200-300 on a workout day.
And that has utility for me because I also exercise about 3 hours a day, and I do morning exercise that sets me up for the day. I take my dogs on a 6-7 kilometer walk every day with a loaded weight as well, which does count because the elevation is high and there's all sorts of things. And then I'll train again in the evening, which sets my blood sugar right for the evening as well. And with Control IQ doing its job, I have regular, consistent, good flat days and nights. And that is only through me learning what works for me. And like exercise in the morning is good, exercise in the evening is good for me. And that midday sort of small exercise with the dogs is also another good thing. And sure. I know not everyone can do 3 hours exercise a day. I'm lucky because I run my own businesses and it's one of the things, but those, and I wouldn't call them sacrifices. They're investment into my future, or investment into my diabetic future, in that I've taken this conscious decision that I don't watch television really. I won't sit down there in the evening for 3 hours and waste that time. I utilize the time to make sure that everything for my life can run as smooth as possible, really. We are on 1 hour, but I think we're going to extend it for maybe 20 or 30 minutes if we can get an extra 20 minutes
for that.
Yeah, because we've just hit on, we've done sort of your running side of things. Now I'll quickly want to talk about sort of the things that you set up. You're part of a number of, is it associations or groups that you do? So please tell us more about them.
I would be happy to. There's a couple of things I wanted to mention just to wrap up our earlier conversation. One thing that you mentioned that I think is very important for both your listeners and my listeners to be aware of is, to paraphrase what you said, your diabetes may vary. One of the things that we became very conscious of during the US run was that people were beginning to look to what we were doing for clues as to how they should be carrying on things in their own lives. And every type 1 either is or should be aware of the risks of something called dead in bed syndrome. One of the things that can aggravate it is doing enough exercise the day before that you go to sleep glycogen depleted and insulin sensitive, and that your overnight basal actually might kill you. And so it's very important to understand what the effects are on blood sugar, not just during exercise, but in the recovery period afterwards. And to make sure that you make decisions in little bits and learn just how much risk you can safely tolerate, and make it a part of your strategy to manage that risk as you engage in a program of physical activity. I had a very frightening episode when I was running across Texas. I had planned to do it without rest days. And on day 10, we had just come off of Texas Highway 302 between Kermit and Odessa. Odessa was the first major city we hit after running West Texas. If you're not picturing what West Texas is like, basically I can tell you that it's dune with semi-trucks and highways. So it's incredibly dusty and dry. Visibility is often compromised when the wind kicks up. There are trucks on the road, probably doing, 70 miles an hour would be what, about 100K?
Yeah, about
100K per hour.
Yeah.
Maybe a foot and a half, so half a meter from where you are running, facing traffic. 2-lane roads where some of these trucks carrying oversized equipment are passing other trucks and veering into your lane. And it's dangerous. And so it makes you want to get off that road as quickly as you can. And we actually had a motorist stop us and say, "You realize you're on one of the most dangerous roads in Texas?" And I'm like, well, it's less dangerous than taking on an additional 100K of roads, going stranger places where people do not expect to find anybody, runner, cyclist, anything, even a broken down motorist. A motorist whose vehicle is broken down.
Yeah.
And so I was running like a bat out of hell to get off of that road. And when we stopped in Odessa for the night and sat down and had dinner, I was exhausted. And one of the things that it may be a product of exhaustion or dehydration or something else that goes with running a 42 mile day. But I wasn't hungry. And I had gotten a small bolus, maybe 2 units, for a fairly good sized dinner. Steak, potatoes, vegetables, half a slice of pie. And when I got to the hotel that night and sort of lay down to go to sleep, I began weaving in and out of consciousness. And every time I was conscious, Leslie would give me, a glucose drink or a glucose tablet or a Kit Kat bar, a Rice Krispie treat or something. And after an hour of that, I was still at right around 25 milligrams per deciliter,
Okay.
Which would be, I think, a little over 1 mole for you guys.
Yeah.
and a millimole, I guess, but I know it's a different system.
Yeah.
But I always divide by 18. So dangerously low, mental impairment type low.
Mm-hmm.
And Leslie finally broke out the glucagon rescue kit and got me back to normal. And that was the first time in my life that I've actually been conscious throughout the whole process. And I got to tell you, fighting to stay conscious at just over 1 millimole
Yes.
it's a struggle. And I think it's important for people to realize that you don't want to put yourself in that situation. I did it out of ignorance, and I consciously chose to never push myself to that dark corner again. It may still happen, and if it does, this time it won't be my fault for being stupid. We took an extra rest day. I ate everything I could find, and that was one of only 2 rest days we took running across Texas. But it's important to realize that your diabetes may vary, and you have to be careful and not just copy whatever I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm doing what works for me. You do what works for you. It's not that you're in the kiddie pool and I'm in the lake. Don't think of it that way. It's just do what works for you.
And as
there's nothing advanced about what I'm doing. It's just what I'm doing because it works for me.
Yeah.
We're not different in that way.
As a caveat to that, I do my exercise in the evening. After that, I have my protein. I have 10 grams of glucose, straight dextrose powder, on purpose, because I know exactly what happens. And then I have some almond milk and other things to go with it. So after the exercise of what I do, I know I replenish those stores of that have been expended, and hence why things are fine for me through the evening.
The other thing I wanted to mention, then I'll get back to your question because I want to be respectful of that, is that stress played a big role in what happened in Odessa. It played a big role in what happened in my first 100-miler. It played a big role in what happened running across Iowa. It played a lesser role in the US run because I consciously tried to manage stress. Stress can elevate blood sugar in very strange ways, sometimes for prolonged periods of time. Psychological stress and physical stress, the body doesn't know the difference. It still produces elevated levels of cortisol. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. It still produces elevated levels of cortisol and other stress hormones. And the problem is that when stress can make you run high, but when you remove the stress, your blood sugar can suddenly return to normal. And if you've been bolusing to get your blood sugar down during periods of stress and the stress goes away, you may suddenly go low. So it's something to think about. One of my endocrinologists that I no longer use recommended I simply bolus if my blood sugar was high. And I'm not a medical professional, but what I would say is ask yourself why it's high. Mm-hmm. If you ate too much and you didn't bolus for it, then yeah, sure, get more insulin. If your blood sugar is high because your father died, cut yourself a break. It's going to stay that way. You don't need to go out and get a prescription for cortisone to try and reduce the stress, you don't need to over bolus insulin. You just need to process the fact that he's not with you anymore and the memories are precious, and get to your quiet place as quick as you can. One of the things that I learned about managing psychological stress when I was out on the road, and it was an incredibly big factor, was that you do what keeps the stress down for you. And if that's deep breathing, like a Navy SEAL would do to control their battlefield stress, that's fine. If it's yoga, that's fine. If it's meditation, that's fine, but don't do it with earbuds because you still need to listen to traffic. But do what keeps your mind quiet, because you have to be rational out there. There are dangers, and even with regular exercise, there's always the chance that something could go wrong. And it's very important to be aware of what's going on with your body at any time. Now, you were talking about, if you have other comments about that's great. I just want to make sure we get to your topic.
Yeah, go on. So the association, just to comment about the high blood sugar one quickly, it's just that when people, more inexperienced people, will potentially do a bolus, they'll wait, and it's not going down. They'll do another bolus, and they'll start what's known as insulin stacking.
And rage bolusing.
Or rage bolus or stacking. And it's just for them to be aware that the moment you start stacking is you will find over that 20, 30, 40-minute period, you will have quite a significant drop in your blood sugar once everything levels out somewhere. So yeah, just to know, try not to stack insulin, try to be patient with what your insulin does, because sometimes it can take 20, for me it's 20 to 30 minutes. I don't have the super fast acting one. They have one here called Fiasp.
So
here too. Yeah, but we can't use it in tandem at the moment, because I don't think
that's correct.
It's not authorized for tandem use. So yeah, and that one works within, I think, 5 minutes. So there are, I think
so.
Yeah, that's interesting for the future. There is another one that's coming out in the UK, which I need to get my hands on, which is authorized with tandem. So hopefully I'll get that sometime soon, and that works quick. So onto your sort of associations and organizations that you work with or are part with, or I think you set one up, didn't you? Was it the diabetes?
Sort of.
Okay.
That's the shorthand version of it. Shortly after I started becoming physically active, I looked up an organization which at the time was called the Diabetes Exercise and Sports Association. The person that I knew of who was in some way in charge of it was a gentleman by the name of Doug Dressman. And he was going to make a visit to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I had seen some of their newsletters, which included ruminations from people who were planning to run the Boston Marathon. And it just seemed like a great resource for me in a time when, even though the internet had at that point been around for maybe 6 years or so, there was still not a lot of connectedness. There wasn't significantly a lot of social media or anything like that really at the time. And certainly not the level of engagement that there is now and the level of connectedness in the type 1 community. So a lady by the name of Missy Snyder, I had been in contact with her because we were both interested in meeting with Doug and seeing if we could start a chapter of DESA in the DFW area. And Missy was their first person. I was actually their second. Over time, Missy's life priorities took her involvement in the organization in a different direction. And I was always interested in doing what I could to build the mailing list and get more people involved and basically build up a network of active type 1s that I could ask questions to. And so it's not quite accurate to say that I started it, but I helped start it with Missy, and I still recognize her as the first person in the Dallas area. That organization went through a couple of phases, being parts of different organizations. For a while, we were an affiliate of Insulin Independence, and there were a couple of people, I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name. I know him, but it's not on the top of my head. But he and Blair Ryan, who actually works for Tandem now, started that organization, and we folded ours into that when DESA kind of folded and Insulin Dependence acquired their mailing list. But there was a point at which Insulin Dependence kind of went its own way and kind of wasn't so active anymore. And we were faced with the decision somewhere in the mid to late 2000s mid to late 2000s. Whether or not to just kind of continue as a chapter of a defunct organization, or to try to build an identity of our own that would remain regardless of our affiliation. And one of our most active members, a lady by the name of Donna Doherty, said, let's just call it what it is, DFW, diabetes and exercise, because that's kind of what we do. It's active type 1s in the DFW area. And we did that. And there was some interest that built in San Antonio and Houston and Austin and Odessa. And eventually changed it to the Diabetes and Exercise Alliance. Okay. And it's taken us time to grow our mailing list, but we have maybe 700 members now, primarily in Texas. There are little chapterlets in Little Rock and Denver as well. But for the most part, it's come from friends telling friends and having common purpose. Our organization sets itself apart in the sense that we do not process anybody's money. We do not need money. What we need to do is spread the word and share experience. And so we only have a few rules. One is that we decided not to make money off of it. So if you decide you're going to make money off of it, don't do that, please. Respect the spirit of the original organization, that it's a pay it forward, share your secrets. If you need to sell t-shirts or something to pay for the office rent for your meetings every month or so at the municipal center, that's fine, but don't turn it into a money-making enterprise. It's not what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
The other one is, don't complain about your endocrinologist. We all have the same problems, and we're not going to listen. And then the third one is that you have to agree to take responsibility for your own diabetes. That kind of goes hand in hand with don't complain about your endocrinologist. If you came here looking for tips on how to get active, you might be a little early in the joining process because everyone in the organization has already decided to do that, and they're looking for tips on the best way to do it. We're not here to motivate you. Mm-hmm. We don't have the skills for that. So through that organization, we've grown some productive affiliations with Beyond Type 1. They've been especially helpful to us in helping us build our local network of diabetes and exercise focused organizations. Their focus is more broadly on type 1 and ours is specifically on exercise. We also have productive relationships with the American Diabetes Association, JDRF, and a number of other charities, including Kids Camps and the Faustman Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital. Our philosophy is, if you want to donate to those people, we have links on my website, t1determined.org, and those go directly to the charities. Now, if you want to send me money, there's a link for that, but it's not on that same page. And a few people have. A couple of guys have, here, treat yourself to a hamburger or something. And I'm like, I can't stand hamburgers anymore. I eat them practically every day on the run. But see, I'm becoming a vegetarian. But those are primarily our organizational links with people in the related type 1 community.
Okay, cool. So yeah, you said the name. So for anyone that is stateside or in the Dallas area or in those areas, then yeah, go look Don up. Dom, sorry. And yeah, we're gonna have to. Yeah, I've got 10 minutes, so 10 minutes sort of time.
Yeah, I'll keep the answer short from your.
No. I want to wrap it.
I thank you for your indulgence.
Oh no, I could sit here for another 2 hours and talk to you about.
I could too, which is the danger.
That's the beauty, because I didn't talk about it so much in my youth. I feel like this is why I do this podcast, is to just simply to talk to people like myself, all this knowledge and information and experience, has some use somewhere. So some
Yeah, and Brad, I would say I'm especially grateful for programs like yours because we have a chance to talk details.
Yeah.
I don't mean anybody any ill will, but perhaps the least productive conversation I had about type 1 was with people at Inside Edition who mostly ran Forrest Gump clips and condensed everything I said into about 10 seconds of video.
Yeah, and this
I kind of felt like, man, that almost didn't mention the type 1 bit, you know.
that was, and I'm sure that's about ratings, isn't it? And that's the beauty of the podcast, the videos, the other things is we get to explore everything in its full entirety. This is
that means the most to me.
This will be unedited. I will take some clips for social media stuff, and we really get to spread it to this other dimension of the internet, which anyone has access to, which is again, I say utility, great utility of the mediums. To round off, I like to take maybe some of your information and say, what would be the 3 key pieces of advice or knowledge you wish to impart to people that might have to type 1s or type 2s, but let's say type 1s at the moment, but three key pieces of advice or information.
The first one is don't judge yourself. Look at your data and see what insight you can get out of it. The second one is when you set goals for yourself, set them after you've accomplished them. The real purpose of setting goals is to get you out there doing something and feeling proud of what you've done enough that you'll go do it the next day. So set your goals after you've accomplished them. Make them small enough that every day is a victory. And then the third thing is don't give up. Not every day is going to go well. Some days will be absolute clusters, but most of them, if you put conscious effort into doing your best job of coping and thriving with a disease you didn't ask for, then that's got to be good enough. And tomorrow is another day. You make a mistake today, you fix it tomorrow. Those would be my 3 pieces of advice for people.
Yeah, that's so. You make a mistake today, and you make a mistake today. Have the self-awareness in order to evaluate and reflect upon what happened that day before, and change.
Yeah.
Maybe change those things. There's this. I could talk again. There's a whole subject I want to talk to you. So I'm going to have you back on again at some point in the future.
I would be happy to. By the way,
that's to talk about mindset and the thing up
there's
here.
There's a saying in ultra running that DNF, which normally stands for did not finish, also stands for did nothing fatal.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of live by that philosophy.
Yeah, every day it can happen. And there's a story. I don't know. I didn't tell you. There's a story where you were on about low blood sugars before, and I had an incident which I don't know if it was out of my control, but there was just so many factors that happened. Is that my blood sugar went to nigh on 0? My heart stopped.
Oh my goodness!
And there was the smallest of on the ECG or whatever it would. They wired me up, but I didn't even know up until the moment I woke up. I've got police around me, ambulance staff. They were literally just about to start shocking me, and I breathed into life with my wife next to me as well, and like, wow. And it again, that completely changed my vision on self-awareness again about my diabetes, because there was a high stress incident that had just happened, and there was so many factors, and it was the perfect storm for this incident for me. But again, DNF.
Did nothing fatal.
Did nothing fatal, but I'm still here, and hence why I'm doing what I'm doing still. So
it does produce gratitude if you manage to live through your mistakes.
Yeah.
And to me, what sustains me in the end is the knowledge that what I've learned from living with type 1 and trying to do some things to amaze myself and maybe inspire some other people to think about it.
Yeah.
Is that so many precious insights into the value of just living another day have come to me as a result of all of that.
Yes.
That it is very difficult to be pessimistic about it. And if you're no longer pessimistic, you've already taken your first step in doing a better job of coping with the disease.
Yeah, there's so much that taking one day at a time. Set your goals, as you said, break them down into smaller chunks, then break it down into smaller daily goals, and then every day becomes better and better and better. And that constructs this bigger goal. Then it constructs this larger vision that you had for the future, and you will get there if you stick with it. And as you say, work hard. And a self-aware, consciousness for me is a big thing for the conscious.
Sure, I love your I love the title of your site.
Yeah,
that was very thought-provoking.
So we will round off. So where can anyone catch you on social media, websites, connect with you? Because I was able to email you direct, luckily,
Sure.
which was via your website. So yeah, please push.
You can contact us on at our website, t1determined.org. I think t1determined.com also redirects there. But on social, we're primarily on Facebook and a little bit on Instagram. We use the hashtags T1Determined. If that's too long to type or you tend to do typos, you can do Don Solo as a hashtag as well. That was a nickname that a fellow ultra runner gave me after the 223-mile run. I also use Keep Going a fair bit, and type 1 diabetes run across America is another hashtag, but it's a mouthful.
Okay.
If you don't have any luck, if you just Google first person to run from Disneyland to Disney World, one of those links will be to T1 Determined.
Cool. And I'm sure they can search you Don Muchow as well.
Yes, last name is Muchow. We were saying, I think in the green room, that's basically what you feed cows.
Muchow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's not hard to find me. They can always get in touch with you. And I think it would be a gift for them to learn from your experiences as well anyway. So it may be that's the preferred way to do it.
Cool.
I'd also love to have people visit your site and listen to some of your podcasts. Because I feel the more insight that people get into living with type 1, the less alone they'll feel and the more empowered and enabled they'll feel.
Yeah. Okay, then. So we're going to wrap it up to Don Muchow. Thank you. Honestly,
thank you.
Like
thank you, Brett, for having me.
It's been so good to, like, an hour and a half has flown by, and I will have you. We're going to talk again, and we're going to keep in touch.
Most certainly.
We're going to keep in touch. So thank you to everyone that has tuned in, that is listening on Spotify, Amazon. That's the dogs. So we'll sign out the Conscious Diabetic Podcast. Big love to everyone. So yeah, stay tuned for the next interruption from my dogs.
That's awesome.
All right.
Good. Who's a good puppy? You're a good puppy. Yes, you are.
Okay, Don. Thank you very much, my friend.
Thank you, Brett.
Take care.
For more information about being a conscious diabetic, check out consciousdiabetic.com. Check out our Conscious Diabetic socials on Instagram and Facebook at Conscious Diabetic. Are you a conscious diabetic? Leave us your reviews and feedback.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. Big love. Love.
Love.
Love. From all of us.